All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you all taking some time out of your afternoon. This is application training webinar part 2 for the Vacant Rental Improvement Program, or VRIP. I am Dan Stevens, Program Director with the Office of Community Renewal. If you did not participate in the first webinar, the part 1, that's no problem. You'll see that it is posted on the VRIP website, which you'll see the address there. We're going to cover some of the same ground, so if you haven't seen it, that's all right. If you did participate in that first webinar, we are going to cover some new things today, so please hold on. Just in terms of some housekeeping for participation today, you won't be able to unmute yourself, but if you do have questions, please put those into the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on those throughout the webinar. We'll try and address those as they come up if it's kind of relevant to what we're discussing. If we don't talk about or we don't answer your question right off the bat, we will get to those at the end, and we will try and save some time for some questions at the end as well. I'm also joined by my colleague Crystal Loeffler, President of the Office of Community Renewal. So we do have a lot of ground to cover, so apologize if I go through things a little bit quickly, but do want to make sure that we save some time for questions as well. We'll talk a little bit today about this program. It is a new program, so I know a lot of folks are not familiar with it. We'll talk a little bit about the opportunity that's available with this current funding round. We'll go through the application instructions, including some specific tips for success. And then we'll wrap up with any questions that you may still have at that point. So by way of background, I think the need for this kind of program has been talked about for a while now. And this past spring, in the state budget cycle, money was set aside by the state legislature for this program. So really, the intent of this program is to bring, what are essentially unlivable units back into productive use while providing affordable rentals for low and moderate income households. So we'll talk a little bit more about the details moving forward here. But right off the bat, I want to make sure that this is very clear that this current funding round is really for grants to organizations and local governments to create their own local grant programs. And so you see this graphic here, how most of the grant programs with the Office of Community Renewal work. Funds are really dispersed and awarded to local organizations that then really are the ones that work directly with property owners. And so, the state kind of sets the parameters and provides the funding, but it's really you all that will be serving as the boots on the ground, implementing this at the local level. So if you are a property owner, maybe a private property owner that sorry, resolving some technical issues there. I apologize for that. So what, I lost my train of thought here, but going back, so, you would be, by submitting an application, you're looking for funds to establish your own local grant, program. So if you are a property owner, if you're a private property owner that's interested in this program to rehabilitate a vacant property or vacant units that you may have, you're welcome to, of course, learn more about the program, but this current funding round is really for nonprofits and local municipalities that will ultimately be establishing local grant programs. So one of the things that I want to clear up a little bit for those of you, particularly that were on part one, because this has changed a little bit, right? Many of you or some of you are likely to be on from nonprofits that maybe are a little bit in between being a property owner and being, just kind of a grant administrator. So if you are in that situation where you are a nonprofit and you have properties that are in your portfolio, um, those properties would be eligible, but really the intent of this grant round and the award is for you to establish a local grant program where you'll be accepting applications, making awards, doing all of those kind of traditional grant administrative activities. But if you do happen to have eligible properties, you can assist those properties to a certain degree if you're a local program administrator. There are some important points here, though. You really must be the intended owner landlord for that 10-year regulatory period. That really applies to all participating property owners. That is one of the requirements of the program. So it's not intended for a property owner, LPA or other property owner to receive funds, rehabilitate properties, and then flip them, sell them. So it's really, for the 10-year regulatory period, you're making a commitment to be the landlord. Your program must still primarily focus on other properties, making awards to other property owners in your service area. And that allocation, the funds that you're allocating to your own properties must still be consistent with any selection and prioritization procedures that you've established. So eligible applicants, not-for-profit organizations, New York State, looking for experience dating back at least 1 year, demonstrated capacity to deliver a high volume rehab program quickly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Partnerships between municipalities and not-for-profits are definitely strongly encouraged, and also partnerships between nonprofits. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and instances where that may make more sense than kind of independent applications. Municipalities are eligible. The one thing with municipalities is we'll really be looking for that demonstration of capacity and experience in running these kind of grant programs. So the properties that are eligible for assistance through VRIP, one of the provisions provided in the enabling legislation is really a hard cap of up to 5 units. So, this is a program that's really geared towards smaller mom and pop kind of landlords, smaller properties. And so there is a 5-unit limitation. And, I would say there's, no loopholes with that really. Right, you can't do kind of the first 5 units of a 100-unit project or something like that. The building itself has to have a maximum of 5 total units. Vacant non-residential buildings are also eligible if they're going to be converted to those long-term affordable rentals. And vacant units in mixed-use buildings are also eligible. So there is some flexibility. And you'll see an important note up here, just that I'll make up front, is that this was a program designed specifically for areas outside of New York City. So we'll talk a little bit more about service areas, but if you are joining us from New York City, it was the one area of the state that is excluded from participating.
And before you move on, can you help me out and make Dina Levy a co-host or panelist also?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I think that should be all set. Welcome, Dina.
Thanks.
The units that will be eligible, so really, there's eligible properties, but it's really the units that will be the primary focus in terms of, making an eligibility determination, what can receive assistance. Those units, they must be vacant, but they must also be vacant due specifically to conditions that are making them uninhabitable or unmarketable. So we can dig into that a little bit more, but right, it's not enough that they're empty. There really has to be documentation that that unit is empty for those reasons. So uninhabitable, that's a little bit more black and white and straightforward, right? Maybe it's just simply not meeting residential code, and by definition, it is therefore uninhabitable. Or it lacks kitchen facilities, plumbing facilities, those kind of things where it's just simply uninhabitable. The second piece of that, the unmarketable piece, provides a little bit more flexibility. So a unit doesn't necessarily have to be in that kind of uninhabitable state. If it's in poor enough quality that it can't be rented, or might only be rented in a situation where somebody's desperate or something like that. Those are the kind of units that we also want to return to kind of the useful housing stock through this program. So a couple footnotes here: no tenant displacement would be allowed. Again, no loopholes, no temporary tenant moving out, then moving back in. Really, these have to be truly vacant units. One of your responsibilities as a local program administrator is to conduct a site inspection up front, confirm that it is vacant. The owner will have to sign something to that effect as well to receive the award. The funds available to property owners, really the property owners are going to have two award options to choose from. One being, what we would refer to as the standard award. So that would be an award up to $50,000 per eligible unit. The condition for receiving that award is that the property owner is going to have to rent to households with an income up to 80% of the area median income. There will also be a rent cap associated with that 80% AMI level. The other option, the enhanced award, there is an incentive for participating property owners to provide greater affordability to rent to households that are under or at 60% of area median income. And in return, they can receive an award of up to $75,000 per unit. So eligible activities are pretty flexible. This is certainly not an all-inclusive list. Generally, all rehabilitation activities to make those units habitable and marketable are going to be eligible uses of funds. So you see some examples here. I expect we'll see a lot of issues around sprinklers and vacant units not being up to code. Right, that's a reason that a lot of these units have not been brought back into productive use. So those kind of things are certainly eligible. Things that are to the property and not necessarily a specific unit are generally acceptable. So if the roof needs to be replaced, foundation repairs, those kind of things would be eligible. One point I'll make here is the program's really intended to provide assistance for rehabilitation of existing units. So with that in mind, there's no new construction, no putting on an addition, those kind of things. It really needs to be work that happens within the building envelope. Similarly, most kind of site work activities would not be permitted. And Crystal, I see some questions popping up. If there's anything that I should stop and address, let me know.
Let's keep moving and we'll save some for the end.
All right, very good. So just the examples of what ultimately this might look like on the ground. Some types of properties that I think probably are in most communities out there. So things like just a vacant multifamily property, a duplex, right? That's a pretty straightforward example of the kind of property that could be assisted through this program. A vacant single family home would be eligible as long as it's being converted to a long-term rental unit. Could potentially be converted to multiple rental units. That mixed use building, right? There's a lot of community centers that have these kind of buildings. The second floor units often don't meet code, expensive to bring them up to code. So those kind of upper floor vacant units would be eligible for participation. Right, you're not going to be able to do anything with the commercial space and so on, but those residential units could receive assistance. And then things like adaptive reuse of vacant structures. There are these plenty of historic properties out there, also very expensive to rehab. And so this is another, this is an opportunity to maybe kill a couple birds with one stone in terms of historic preservation goals as well. The property owners that are going to be eligible for receiving awards certainly have to be the legal owner of the property. Again, they have to be that intended owner for the 10-year regulatory period. LLCs and nonprofits are eligible to participate as property owners. And then there is this requirement that you see that property owners have to be verified as responsible owners. This is something where you, as the local program administrator, would ultimately be responsible for vetting property owners, and you'd have some flexibility to determine exactly how you do that. And it's one of the things that we ask you to think about and respond to as part of the application. Right, but the idea is, we don't want to see funds going to property owners that are notorious bad actors in community, in communities out there. And so, one of the things that you'll need to think about are, what are the criteria that, you would be considering, to ensure that awards are made for, to responsible property owners that are going to be fair and responsible landlords moving forward. In addition to those, what I would call harder eligibility requirements, there's also a requirement for making prioritizations. So as you're receiving applications, one of the things that you would be required to prioritize are local owners. But again, you see that you as the local program administrator would have the flexibility to define what local means in the context of your community. And then again, I mentioned that one of the intents of the program is to assist more of those kind of mom and pop developers, not large development companies, property management companies, that don't need the assistance, but smaller local property owners. So one of the other prioritization requirements is to really put those folks at the front of the line that have small portfolios, which in this case is defined as under 20 units. The other thing that I'll emphasize here is, these are kind of what we've laid out, program requirements, but you would have the flexibility, would be strongly encouraged to adopt additional criteria for how you want to prioritize awards in your service area. So things that you might want to be thinking about, are there certain types of property owners thinking about, maybe prioritizing based on need, financial need? Or are there certain types of properties or specific areas where you might want to prioritize making awards? So again, this is something that you'll see in the application, where we want to see you put some thought into, how you would kind of craft that within your own program. So some property owner requirements. So in exchange for receiving the state assistance, these are some of the key things that property owner is going to be required to do. They will have to, as part of their application process, disclose all properties that they own or have a controlling interest in. Again, getting to that small property owner prioritization piece. They will have to sign an affidavit as a responsible owner. They will be responsible for making sure that income qualified tenants are selected. Now, it's probably an area where you as the LPA are going to be helping them do that. But at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to make sure that those units are occupied by income qualified tenants. They will be required to sign long-term leases, minimum of 1 year. Definitely no short-term rentals are going to be permissible. A restrictive rental covenant will be placed on the property for 10 years. We'll talk a little bit more about how that security instrument is going to function. And the rent, there will be a maximum monthly rent that property owners can charge. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that will be figured. They will have to recertify on an annual basis that they're adhering to these key affordability requirements.
So Dan, a couple of questions have come up about that piece. So I think you might be prepared to handle it in some coming slides, but the question is what happens if a tenant is no longer income qualified? Can you talk about the process?
Yeah, good question. So I would say the policy is pretty compassionate in that case. So if a tenant is originally qualified, they sign a lease, they move in, then let's say they get a new job, higher income, they no longer meet that income requirement. That tenant may stay in the apartment and they may also renew their lease. So they don't need to be removed. The only time that the income qualification must be done is when a new tenant is moving into the unit. So if there's turnover, so if that tenant were to leave and a new tenant were to come in, then that new tenant would need to be income qualified. Otherwise, that originally qualified tenant may continue to stay in the apartment. Any others, Crystal, before I move on?
One asking for clarification on the 80% or 60%. Just the difference between the two.
Oh, sure. So that refers to the income level relative to the area median income. So that will be set by HUD every year for each geography. So those will be fairly well established, and the 80% is if again that standard award is received by the property owner. So there's a little bit folks with a little bit higher income than the 60% level, they could rent to those households up to that 80%, which would have a corresponding higher maximum monthly rent that the property owner could charge. Whereas the 60% level, those are going to be lower income folks. There's going to be a lower maximum rent that the property owner could charge to those households.
Sorry.
It's that incentive.
So just to clarify, the question was more about when they kick in. So basically, the 60% restriction is tied to a larger grant investment on the front end. So if a property owner participates and receives that larger grant investment, they're then committing to the lower rent charging for the next 10 years.
Okay, yep.
And a question keeps coming in. We will, yes, post these slides on the website and make them available after the presentation.
All right, let's keep moving here. So the security instrument, this is something that will be filed in most cases with the county, in some cases maybe the municipality, but this will be a requirement for participation, and this will really kind of be the restrictive piece that ensures compliance with those affordability requirements. Full repayment will be required for non-compliance or for selling the property during the regulatory period. Another key thing to note here is that these rent restrictions and the tenant income requirement are going to be restrictions that transfer with the property. So those will be in place for 10 years. So it's something that property owners are going to need to be aware of, think about, consider, and agree to as part of their participation. The maximum rent restriction, there's a little bit more information if you look on the website and get into that frequently asked questions document. I think, a little bit more about specifically how that's calculated. But some of the key things here, that will be based on the unit size. It won't be based on the tenant household size. It won't be based on the tenant income. So it'll be a little bit more standardized based on that unit size. And then there will be a third-party calculator, which, underlying that is kind of an assumption that 30% of income being used for rent, and that will be set up either the 60% AMI level or the 80% AMI level. So there's, I know that there's probably questions about that, but again, if you look at that calculator, look at the FAQ document, I think it'll be a little bit more clear. And then we did talk about the income tenant requirement. So both of those things will be part of a restrictive rental covenant, will transfer with the property. So we'll shift gears a little bit, talk about the funding round. 40 million has been set aside. It's the intent to award the full 40 million as part of this grant round. The maximum grant request is 5 million. There is a minimum at 750,000. You will be able to budget up to 10% of the total grant award for what we call program delivery costs. And what we mean by those program delivery costs are really your costs associated with implementing this program. So, it's not necessarily general admin for your organization, but it's your admin associated specifically with implementing this program. So I know there have been some questions about the disbursement process, so want to clarify that here. The program will operate on a reimbursable or cost incurred basis, so work will need to be completed first, but the entire project does not need to be completed before money can start to move. Progress payments will be allowed to assist with cash flows. So if let's say a contractor is completing the first part of a job or is hitting a milestone, is submitting an invoice, as soon as that invoice is submitted, is generated and you submit that to us, we can process it. So There's a couple options for how you can choose to handle those kind of disbursements, and you see those here. So you can choose to submit those unpaid invoices directly to us for payment. Our typical turnaround time is going to be around 10 to 20 days. So for some contractors, that's fine. For others, it might not be. So that's something to you have to be considering. You have the option. You can require property owners to pay contractors and then be reimbursed. So you don't necessarily have to use your own funds, your own organization's funds or municipal funds. You do have that option. A lot of these property owners are going to have access to some capital. Maybe it's construction financing. Or you still have the option to use your own funds and receive reimbursement. So some options on the table for consideration here. In terms of eligible service areas, I mentioned New York City is specifically excluded, but otherwise there's no limitations in terms of the service area that you can propose. So whether that be a region, county, city, we're not specifying any specific scale, but whatever you're proposing, you really should be justifying and supporting, backing that up with documentation, numbers, and we'll talk a little bit about that as part of the application. But whatever you're proposing as your service area, we really want to see that you've documented that there's sufficient demand relative to what you would be asking for. And you all as applicants, potential applicants, are strongly encouraged to coordinate with others in your geography. Again, this is something we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's going to make for a much more competitive application if there are partners that are submitting in collaboration for a certain service area where roles and responsibilities have worked out. Then if we get multiple applications from the same geography that are essentially competing with one another. So I'm going to continue to emphasize that. Please be coordinating with other organizations within your area.
Right. That's a question that's come up in the chat, right? If a non-for-profit is applying, can a municipality within that service area apply? And we can't restrict it. We won't make either party an ineligible applicant, but we really do want to see local coordinated efforts for this because really you're just competing against one another for the same resources. So like Dan said, coordinate locally, decide who has capacity to run this grant program, right? Which party might already be doing this work, but then hopefully both parties, the municipality and non-for-profit, can coordinate and offer support to the primary applicant. Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. So I'll touch on a couple of your key responsibilities as the grantee. Review and prioritize applications. You'll have to develop an intake process system for evaluating eligibility, prioritization, all of those kind of things that we talked about. You will be executing agreements with property owners. One of your duties will be to conduct an initial site visit, make that determination of vacancy, document current conditions, those kind of things. Prepare a scope of work and a cost estimate. You will have to play a role in contractor solicitation in partnership with the owner, but you have to have a role in that to ensure that there are no things like conflicts of interest and so on in that procurement process. You will be completing an environmental review, and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that means. Construction monitoring, make sure contractors are doing quality work and doing that final inspection. You'll have ultimate responsibility for that security instrument, making sure all of those legal documents are filed, maintaining documentation, those disbursements and reports submitted to us here at OCR. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of the ongoing monitoring of property owners over that 10-year period. So during that 10-year period, you do have a responsibility to monitor compliance. Now, it's not intended to be a major administrative burden. So some of the key things that are going to be required, making sure that that owner is charging under that maximum rent that they're allowed to. If there has been any tenant turnover, making sure that income qualification has been done, that those new tenants moving in meet those income requirements. And then, essentially periodic spot checking, making sure the units are being kept in decent condition. So we're not very prescriptive about how you have to do this. So if I know a lot of organizations have existing monitoring processes in place. So if you do, you can just adapt that to use that process. If you don't, we can help think through what makes sense in terms of a monitoring process. But again, it's not intended for you to, have a huge ongoing burden. The environmental review, with this being state money, seeker applies. So if you're familiar with any of our other programs, this will be similar. But if you're not, this is an environmental checklist that you'll be responsible for completing for each individual project. Most of these are typically not very cumbersome or burdensome to complete. In fact, with the historic cultural resources, we do have a new policy in place where a lot of project work will be exempt from SHPO review, the State Historic Preservation Office review. So we have tried to streamline a lot of things as part of this process, but know that it is one of the requirements. The lead requirement, I want to talk a little bit about that because there are some specific requirements with respect to that as part of VRIP. So for any properties pre-1978, the scope of work is going to need to include an initial risk assessment, which would be treated as a soft cost, could come out of that project budget, the $50,000 or $75,000 award, but it will be required. The results of that, you're going to have to work into the scope. Work is going to need to be performed by a RRP certified contractor, so that's the EPA rule. When work is complete, there needs to be final clearance testing, make sure the dust that's settled is lead-free after the rehabilitation. So there is a lead requirement. It's not, it's not as burdensome as maybe, some of the federal programs, but know that this requirement is in place. All right, the timeline, it's getting down to crunch time here. The grant round will be closing October 3rd, 4:00 p.m. So you've got a couple weeks to finish up those applications. Anticipate making awards in the November-December timeframe. So would expect probably in January for contracts to be executed and for everyone to be underway. So it is going to be a 24-month grant term. So, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. That's going to go by quick. So one of the things that we are going to be looking for as part of your application are your plans for kind of a quick start, capacity right off the bat to launch and launch quickly. So some of the things as you prepare to apply here, make sure you do read everything in detail. There is a draft administrative plan that's up on the website. That is something that would be part of your contract as the grantee. So it spells out in a little bit more detail your roles and responsibilities. Please review that, make sure you know what you're signing up for. We talked about this, coordinate with local partners, be very specific in your application about who you anticipate doing what. Research and assess demand. We'll talk more about that as another point of emphasis. But again, really want to see that you've documented that there's demand in your service area. And of course, reach out to us with any questions as you are going through. The scoring criteria that will apply to applications, project development and compliance, as well as experience and administrative capacity being the two real major categories. Demand documentation and ability to generate demand, 25 points, and then budget and fiscal responsibility. So those scores will be based on these 10 exhibits that you will see in the application. I'm not going to just read these off the slide, but there's a couple specific ones that I'm going to talk about on the next couple of slides. So some general tips for success. Do your homework. Again, emphasizing we want to see that you've done the research, you've documented demand that's out there for funds in your service area. Again, capacity, the quick start, making sure that you have a staffing plan, whether it's new staff, whether it's using a consultant, what is your plan to, for what may really be a, kind of a robust and quick moving program. Realistic requests, know thyself, what your capacity is, understand what the demand is in your service area, make sure what you're asking for is realistic. Clear and informed responses as always. So a couple tips for success. In Exhibit 4, called Administrative Procedures, you'll see a question on project development. So here you really want to show a thoughtful and specific approach for your marketing and outreach. Right, I know this, many of you do marketing and outreach for kind of general homeowner programs, but this is a very specific target audience, and so we want to see that you've thought about how to reach those, those mom and pop property owners. Demonstrate understanding of the responsible owner requirement. Right, we've left that, as one of your responsibilities for thinking about how you're going to go about that vetting process. What are the key things that you're going to be looking for? So we want to see some thought put into that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you do have, additional prioritization, scoring criteria, what is your approach to selecting projects? Are there certain types that you're going to prioritize over others? Getting back to partner coordination. So again, in Exhibit 4, there will be a question specifically about this. Right, in a lot of cases, it's going to be a more competitive application if it's submitted in collaboration or there's partners versus, potentially being competitive against other organizations in your service area. So be thinking about, if some type of joint application might make more sense. Particularly, if you're a smaller organization, maybe you don't have a lot of capacity, right? It might make more sense for you to partner with, a larger, higher capacity organization. Certain instances, it might make sense to focus on specific areas within an overall service area. So, you might have an organization that's better suited for, the towns of a county, more rural towns, and then you might have another organization that focuses on the municipality that's, a city that's in that county, um, and that's their strength. So be thinking about those kind of things. If you do have a partnership, there will be one official applicant. We'll contract directly with one entity, but certainly the qualifications of all partners are considered, so be sure to include those. We want to see that detailed information on the roles and responsibilities. Who is going to be doing what? Is there an entity that's just doing the marketing and outreach? Is there one partner that's just doing inspections and scopes of work? Make sure you detail that. And if you do have any organization agreements in place, memorandum of understanding, those kind of things, share those. We want to see those. So the demand documentation piece of this, you'll see in the application that we're really looking for you to demonstrate to us that not only are there a sufficient number of eligible properties and units, but there are property owners that are going to be signing up for this that are interested in participating. To borrow a line from my colleague Crystal, it's it's a lot harder to give away grant funds than you think. So documenting the vacant properties, units is a good first step. The more you can do to convince us that there are property owners lining up for these funds, the better. So we do want to see numbers. You don't have to do extensive analysis and calculations, but we do want to see that you've put some thought into actual numbers in terms of units that are within your proposed service area. And you see the blue box here, some things to consider, that you can pull from, things that have already been done, available market and housing studies. You don't have to do a custom market analysis, but a lot of times you can find that data out there. Municipal property records usually, keep track of vacant properties. Anything you can do to demonstrate interest from actual property owners is great. And then, other kind of expert third-party letters, and not necessarily just letters of support. I know everybody, it supports, your efforts to get grants, but more interested in seeing letters, talking specifically about how there's a need and demand out there for the funds. The monitoring plan. So again, it goes back to that 10-year monitoring requirement. We want to see that you have a good understanding of what that involves. Again, because this is something that we're leaving to you to do what's best for your organization, given your current policies, your other monitoring efforts. We want to understand what your plan is, including how over the 10 years staff changes. So how are those responsibilities going to be handed off? So staffing plan and administrative capacity. Again, this is a 24-month grant period. It's going to have to start quickly. And so, I would say one of the things that you want to emphasize in your response here is, your kind of initial capacity, your plan to ramp up launch quickly. So include anything, specifics about staff assignments, what everybody's role is going to be. If you are hiring people, tell us, be specific about what your plans are for that, or if you're using a consultant, make sure you include information on that as well. This is also an opportunity if you have had challenges specifically with implementing grant programs, OCR grant programs. This is where you would want to address those, lessons learned, why those obstacles you don't expect to encounter here. So application instructions, this will be an emailed submission. On the website, you'll be able to download the necessary workbook. So that is an Excel workbook where you'll find those 10 exhibits. They'll be on different Excel tabs. I think as most of us know, writing things in Excel is not ideal. So would definitely recommend drafting your responses in something like Word and copying them in, and please make sure everything is readable. The other piece, there are some attachments that you'll be responsible for. There's a vendor responsibility questionnaire. If you've already submitted that to us in 2024, you don't need to fill out a new one. Just submit the copy that you have previously submitted, and that's okay. There's an application certification that you'll have to sign. We do want to see any either funding commitment letters, if there are other funding sources that you'll be using as part of this, or those partner organization agreements. And then again, showing the documentation, there's an opportunity to upload any documents, supporting documentation, demonstrating need or demand. If you do have any questions, this is how to reach out. You can reach me at that number or send an email. Happy to chat through any questions. Would encourage you to look through that FAQ document. There's a lot of more detailed policy and guideline information in there. That draft. Oh, yeah, question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say any questions we don't get to today, we will update in FAQs, or feel free to reach out to us directly, but we will go through a couple of more. Sorry to interrupt you, Dan.
Oh, no, that's great. Thanks, Crystal. And then just as I mentioned, the admin plan, that is actually on the website now. So something that you'll want to look through, and the copy of this presentation will be up there shortly.
There are several questions about the regulatory term and responsibilities. So I think instead of going through each of those, we'll try to be a little bit more direct about some of these points in the FAQ so that everybody can see those answers and use that information to prepare their applications. Dan, some other questions that we have gotten are about eligible participants and eligible property owners. Can you go over that again, the point about non-for-profit owners and their own buildings?
Sure. Yes. So if you're a nonprofit, if you're on from a nonprofit today, and you've got buildings that meet this vacant eligibility, and you're looking at opportunities to rehabilitate those buildings, you've really got excuse me, two choices to consider. So with the current grant round, you have the opportunity to submit a grant application. You can establish a local grant program, and out of that grant program, you can essentially make awards to your own properties. As long as that's not your primary focus, then that would be fine. The expectation is still that you will operate a grant program that property owners can apply to you for funding. So would not expect that the majority of the funds that you receive would go to your own properties, for example. So that's one option. The other option is, you can simply participate as a property owner, in which case you would not submit an application, to be an LPA to administer a local grant program. You would essentially be waiting for another entity to establish a local grant program. So, that may or may not happen in your geography. But should that program, that local program be established, you could then apply as just a participating property owner to receive an award.
Another question about eligible owners is there a length of time or limit on term of ownership? For example, if somebody just purchased a property within 6 months, are they eligible to apply to local programs?
Yep, there's no requirement. I would say, it goes a little bit back to the requirement for vetting landlords to making sure that they're responsible, they're local, they're small. So I think, there's no prohibition or requirement that they own the property for a certain amount of time. It's something that you might want to think about as part of your prioritization criteria and how that fits in with the responsible owner requirement. But otherwise, there's no kind of state mandated minimum period of ownership.
Another question about basically about level of documentation required to document demand and property owner interest. Do you want me to cover that one, or do you want?
Well, I mean, let me start, and then if I miss anything, feel free to jump in. I think it's, probably the unsatisfying answer to that is the more the better. As I said, documenting that there's vacant units, vacant properties that would be eligible is an important first step. So, we would be looking for, numbers. Did you pull census data, or do you have a summary table from property tax records? Those kind of things. And then the more you can do, to convince us that there are property owners that, would accept grant awards, that would apply, I would say the better. So, I don't want to be too specific because that can take a lot of different shapes and form. But I think the more robust the documentation, the more competitive the application would be. Crystal, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that generally covers it, but the idea is this is a large grant program, a lot of resources. You're eligible to request a pretty significant sized contract. For us to award a contract like that, we need very significant evidence that there are, eligible properties, right? Properties with vacant units within them, and those property owners are actually interested in applying and participating in this type of grant program. So, like Dan said, that might look different for different applicants, different sizes of service area. But whatever you can do to kind of prove in your application that demand exists and how to, I guess, drum up business if you're awarded, that's what we want to see in the applications. Like I said, so I think we're out of time. Were we just going until 3, Dan?
I think we've got until 3:30.
Oh.
If there are more questions, we can keep going.
There are a couple more, but I think a lot of the questions in the chat I'd like to cover in FAQs so we can get out there more consistently. There are questions about soft costs, environmental review expenses. So we will try to outline in the FAQs some better definitions of what would fall under the program delivery line, or what might be a project soft cost that falls within that per project limit. But I guess we could talk through a couple more. A question is, can these funds be used to rehab vacant properties purchased from a land bank or municipality?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. So if we're just talking about a private property owner that purchases from a land bank or something like that, yeah, there would be no there would be nothing that would prohibit that person from then applying for grant funds, if I'm understanding that question correctly.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
There's another question that I think gets more to the point with this about vacant properties where it seems like the ownership is less clear or unsettled. And so I think we could say that may not work in this program, right? So for this program, you need a property owner as an applicant to your local program. So if the ownership at the time is unclear, you don't have an eligible property owner, that would really need to be settled before they become eligible to participate or even apply to you to participate. This is an interesting one. How do you prevent investors from buying vacant properties right now and taking advantage of these funds? Vet property owners' financials, question mark. So, you know, throughout the presentation, Dan mentioned this concept of vetting responsible property owners, responsible landlords. That's ultimately going to be the responsibility of selected applicants as local program administrators for these funds. We've provided some recommendations, I believe, in the draft admin plan for the types of things you would look at to make this a consideration, but it's something that we want local administrators to settle in the beginning of their program and apply consistently for all applicants throughout the term of the program. I don't know if you have more to add to that, Dan.
No, I think that's good. I think, right, investors is a broad term, right? The program's not intended to, help, major, development companies or so on, right? But, small mom and pop landlords are still investors. So, I think there's a little bit of nuance to that question, but to Crystal's point, it really goes to kind of your responsibility as the LPA to have policies in place for that responsible owner, and then how you're going to prioritize your awards.
Right. Ultimately, the goal of this program is to bring existing vacant units back to market. So I think as long as the general responsible owner piece is vetted as part of this process, participation would meet this goal of creating new rehabbed units available for rental. There's a question about, is there a preference for pro-housing community designation? This was not stated as a formal eligibility requirement for this program, but it's certainly something that we would look at in terms of demand and capacity in reviewing this application, right? Like if we see that a community has few barriers to rehabbing units and development and permitting projects, that certainly helps demonstrate capacity and demonstrate readiness to run this type of program. And then just, I want to also highlight something that Dan mentioned. There's some questions about environmental review, and Dan mentioned the SHPO process. As of this year, we have an adjusted process with an agreement with the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, where additional properties may be exempt from the SHPO review requirement. So the process that you see in place for some of our state-funded grant programs is getting a little bit more streamlined and simpler because that formal consultation with SHPO is required for fewer properties participating with just general rehab programs like this. So that should be good news. Will contractors performing the work need workers' comp and general liability insurance? Yes. Any of the grant programs with the local program administrator structure, we require that your participating contractors carry both types of insurance. I think we're pretty much caught up with questions. The ones that we have not answered, like I said, we will address in updated FAQs. And we will post these slides online for everyone.
Great. Well, then I'll just say thank you again to everyone for your interest in the program. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We'll try and get that FAQ document posted as soon as possible. We do have your email addresses, so we'll send you a notice when that's available as well. So thanks again, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Dan.